Hello, and welcome back to the garden. A little while ago I put together a run of low-cost hacks, and the response told me you wanted more of the same. Small, practical things that don't cost much and actually earn their place. So today I've got 14 more for you. As always, my promise is simple. By the end of this, you'll have at least one thing you can try this week without spending real money. And I'll be honest where the evidence is solid and honest where it's thinner, because I'd far rather you trust me than be dazzled by me. Let's get into it. Let's start where a lot of gardens start, which is a tray of seedlings on a windowsill. If you've ever watered from the top and watched the seeds float around, or lost a whole batch to that sudden collapse where the little stems go thin and topple over, that's usually a fungal problem we call damping off, and it thrives in soil that's wet and stagnant right at the surface. The fix costs nothing. Instead of watering over the top, stand your pots or trays in a shallow bath of water and let the compost draw the moisture up from below. The soil wicks up exactly what it needs, the surface stays a little drier, and the seeds aren't disturbed at all. Give it 15 or 20 minutes, then lift the pots out so they're not sitting in water for hours on end, because roots want moisture, not a swamp. It's a gentler, steadier way to water anything young and vulnerable, and it quietly heads off one of the most common reasons seedlings fail. Here's one that saves you time, space, and the quiet disappointment of an empty seed tray. If you've got seed that's a few years old and you're not sure it's still alive, don't gamble a whole tray on it. Take a small number, 10 is a tidy number because the maths is easy. Lay them on a damp piece of kitchen paper, fold it over, slip it into a container or a loosely closed bag somewhere warm, and check back after a few days to a week. If 8 of your 10 sprout, that's roughly an 80% success rate and the seed is fine. If only 2 or 3 come up, you know to sow more thickly or to buy fresh. And there's a bonus here. For larger seeds like beans, peas, squash and corn, you can pre-sprout them this way on purpose and only pot up the ones that have clearly germinated. You're not wasting compost or windowsill space on seed that was never going to come. It's a small habit, but it takes the guesswork out of sowing. Now, watering. There's a piece of advice you'll hear everywhere, which is to water deeply and less often rather than a little every day. And for the most part, it's true, and it's worth understanding why. When the surface is always damp, roots have no reason to go looking. They sit up near the top, where the heat and the dry spells hit hardest. Let the top inch or two dry out between good soakings, and the roots chase the moisture downward, and a plant with deep roots is a far more resilient, drought-tolerant plant. That's genuinely well supported for your deep-rooted fruiting crops, your tomatoes, your squash, your peppers. But I want to be straight with you, because there's a caveat that often gets left off. Leafy greens like lettuce and spinach are shallow-rooted by nature, and they would much rather have steady, consistent moisture than a long dry spell followed by a flood. So the rule isn't one size fits all. Deep and infrequent for the deep rooters, steady and even for the salad leaves. And if you're ever unsure how far your water actually reached, push a long screwdriver down into the soil. Wherever it slides in easily, the water got there. While we're on water, here's a free improvement that costs you nothing but a change of habit. Water in the early morning, and water at the base of the plant rather than over the leaves. Morning matters because the air is cool and still, so far less is lost to evaporation than in the heat of the afternoon. You're getting more plant for every drop. And watering the soil rather than the foliage keeps the leaves dry, which matters because a lot of the fungal troubles that plague tomatoes, squash and beans get their start on damp leaves that sit wet overnight. If the only time you can water is the evening, that's still fine. Just try to keep it off the leaves. None of this needs special equipment. A watering can aimed low at the roots does the job perfectly. It's simply the difference between watering with intention and watering out of habit. Here's a planning hack that changes how much you actually eat from your garden. So many of us sow a whole packet of lettuce, or beans, or radish in one go, and then 3 weeks later we've got more than we could possibly use. It all bolts or goes woody at the same moment, and then there's nothing at all. The answer is succession sowing. Instead of one big sowing, put in a short row or just a few modules every couple of weeks through the season. You end up with a steady trickle of young, tender produce rather than a glut and then a gap. It works beautifully for the fast crops, salad leaves, radish, spinach, dwarf beans, spring onions. It does take a little discipline because you have to remember to keep sowing. But it's the single biggest shift between a garden that feeds you for a few dramatic weeks and one that quietly feeds you for months. Small and often beats big and once. This next one turns a household nuisance into a genuinely useful tool. If you want to clear a weedy patch or start a new bed without the backache of digging, plain cardboard laid over the ground will smother what's underneath by blocking the light, and over the season the worms pull it down and it feeds the soil as it goes. A few honest words of caution though, because the details matter here. Use plain brown corrugated cardboard, the ordinary shipping box sort. Pull off every bit of tape, every staple, every plastic label, because those don't rot down and you'll be picking them out of the soil for years. Steer clear of glossy, waxed, or heavily colored printing, because the inks and coatings on those can carry things you don't want in ground you're growing food in. And if you're ever unsure, there's a simple test. Drip a little cooking oil onto it, and if it beads up rather than soaking in, that suggests a grease-resistant coating, so leave it out of the edible beds. Overlap your sheets generously so weeds can't sneak up through the gaps. Wet the whole lot down and cover it with compost, leaves, or grass clippings to hold it in place. Free, effective, and not a spade in sight. Staying with free materials, if you've got deciduous trees anywhere near you, autumn hands you one of the best soil improvers there is, completely free, and most people bag it up and throw it away. Fallen leaves, gathered into a wire cage, an old bin, or just some sacks with a few holes poked in for air, will slowly break down into what's called leaf mold, a dark, crumbly, sweet-smelling material that's wonderful for improving soil structure and holding moisture. It works a little differently from your compost heap. Compost is a warm, fast process driven by bacteria. Leaf mold is a cool, slow one driven mostly by fungi, which is exactly why it asks for patience, usually a year or two, and sometimes longer. You can hurry it along by running the mower over the leaves first to shred them, and by keeping the pile damp, because a bone-dry heap just sits there doing nothing. One sensible caution: skip leaves swept off busy roadsides, because they can carry road pollutants that only concentrate as the pile shrinks down. It isn't a rich feed. Think of it as a soil conditioner rather than a fertilizer, but as a free way to build lovely, moisture-holding soil. It's very hard to beat. Here's one for any bed that's about to sit empty for a stretch, after you've pulled your early crops, or right over the winter. Rather than leaving bare soil to be beaten by the rain and colonized by weeds, sow a green manure, sometimes called a cover crop. These are fast, cheap plants you grow not to eat, but to feed and protect the soil, and then cut down and either dig in or leave on the surface to break down before you plant again. In the warm months, buckwheat is a good quick one, and it flowers generously for the bees. For the cooler seasons, field beans, clover, and grazing rye all do the job. And the beans and clover, being legumes, actually pull nitrogen out of the air and leave some behind in the soil for your next crop. One tip that keeps it from becoming a headache: cut them down before they set seed, or the green manure you planted on purpose becomes next year's weed problem. It's a quiet, unglamorous habit, but it's how you keep soil alive and improving in the gaps between the crops you actually harvest. Let's talk about getting next year's plants for nothing. Some of the easiest crops to save your own seed from are beans, peas, lettuce, and tomatoes. Let a few of your best plants flower and mature fully, collect and dry the seed, store it somewhere cool and dark, and you've got next season sorted without spending a penny. But here's the honest caveat that a lot of enthusiastic videos skip, and it genuinely matters. This works reliably with what are called open-pollinated or heirloom varieties. Those come true, meaning the seed grows up much like the parent plant. If your plant was an F1 hybrid, and it'll usually say so on the packet, the saved seed won't come true. You'll get a mixed, unpredictable bag, sometimes disappointing, sometimes just odd. So it's not that seed saving doesn't work. It's that it works predictably when you start with the right kind of variety. Begin with open-pollinated beans and tomatoes, which are forgiving and mostly self-pollinating, and you'll get the hang of it very quickly. It's one of the oldest and most satisfying money savers in gardening, as long as you know what it is you're saving. This next one isn't flashy, but skipping it is behind a lot of heartbreak in late spring. When you've raised seedlings indoors or in a greenhouse, and it's finally time to plant them out, don't move them straight from that soft, sheltered life into full sun and wind in a single day. They simply haven't developed the toughness to cope, and you'll often watch them stall, scorch, or collapse, a shock they never needed to suffer. The fix is just patience, spread over about a week. Set them outside in a sheltered, partly shaded spot for a couple of hours on the first day, then bring them back in. Each day after that, give them a little longer and a little more exposure to sun and breeze. By the end of the week, they've toughened up, and the move into the ground barely registers. It's called hardening off. It costs you nothing but a few minutes a day, and it's the difference between transplants that sulk for a fortnight and ones that carry straight on growing as if nothing happened. Here's how to get far more out of your leafy greens than most people do. With lettuce, spinach, chard, kale, and a great many salad leaves, you don't have to pull up the whole plant to harvest it. Instead, take only the outer, older leaves and leave the growing center, that little cluster right at the heart, completely alone. The plant keeps producing from the middle, and you keep picking from the outside, sometimes for weeks or even months. With the loose leaf lettuces and many cutting mixes, you can go a step further and shear the whole plant down to a couple of inches above the crown, and it'll flush back with fresh growth for another round. It's called cut and come again, and it turns a single sowing into a long, generous supply rather than one all or nothing harvest. Pair this with the succession sowing I mentioned earlier, and a surprisingly small patch of ground will keep a household in salad far longer than you'd ever expect. Now, a way to turn one herb plant into many for free. A lot of the soft-stemmed herbs will root from a simple cutting in a glass of water on the windowsill. Mint and basil are almost comically easy, and rosemary, sage and thyme will oblige too, though they take a bit more time about it. Snip a healthy non-flowering shoot a few inches long. Strip the leaves off the lower portion so that no foliage is sitting under the water where it would only rot, and stand it in a glass in bright but not scorching light. Change the water every few days to keep it fresh. Within a couple of weeks, you'll usually see little white roots appear, and once they're an inch or so long, you can pot the cutting up into soil. It's a genuinely satisfying bit of something for nothing. One supermarket basil plant or one established clump of mint can become a whole windowsill of them. Mint especially will keep you supplied indefinitely, though a fair warning that its sheer enthusiasm is exactly why it's best kept in a pot rather than let loose in a bed. Along the same lines, and straight from the kitchen, when you buy a bunch of spring onions or scallions, don't throw away the white root ends. Stand them root down in a shallow glass of water on a bright sill, and within days you'll see fresh green shoots pushing up, ready to snip into whatever you're cooking. Now, let me be honest about this one, because it does tend to get oversold as an endless free supply. In water, you'll realistically get 2 to 4 good regrowths before the new shoots turn thin and weak and start to lose their flavor. The little root end simply runs out of stored energy. If you want more than that, move them into a pot of soil after the first regrowth, where they'll grow fuller, tastier, and carry on far longer. So it's a lovely, easy trick and a nice one to do with grandchildren, because it's quick and visible. Just go into it knowing it's a handy top-up rather than a bottomless supply. And for the last one, a single, inexpensive material that quietly does 2 jobs at once. A lightweight garden fabric, the sort sold as floating row cover or fleece, laid loosely over your plants, earns its keep twice over. First, as a physical barrier, it simply keeps the pests off. The cabbage white butterflies that riddle your brassicas, the carrot fly, various beetles. If they can't land on the plant, they can't lay their eggs on it, and you've avoided the whole problem without a single spray. Second, it traps a little warmth, buying you a few degrees of frost protection at either end of the season, so you can sow a bit earlier in spring and stretch your harvest later into autumn. Drape it loosely so the plants have room to grow. Weigh the edges down with soil, stones or boards so nothing can sneak underneath, And do remember to lift it off crops like squash and beans when they're flowering and need the bees to reach them. One modest length of fabric, reused year after year, pest control and season extension in the very same simple sheet. So there are your 14. As always, you don't need to do all of them. Pick the one that speaks to whatever's frustrating you right now, whether that's seedlings keeling over, a glut of lettuce, or a bed of bare soil, and just give it a go this week. Everything here rests on how plants and soil actually behave, not on wishful thinking, and where I wasn't certain, I've tried to tell you so. If one of these earns itself a permanent place in your garden, that's a good week's work. Thank you for spending this time with me. Look after yourselves, and I'll see you back in the garden soon.